Hello YouTube, this is Matt Pullen, and today I'm going to be talking about a line that I found out about in my new book, Starting Out the English by Neil McDonald. And it's an everyman book, and I think actually it's quite good. It does a lot in explaining the positional concepts behind the English opening C4. A lot of the tips that he gives in the book in boldface print are obviously for beginners. But I am learning a lot from this book. There are several ideas in the English opening I didn't know about before reading this book. So maybe you should go and check it out. It's not a paid advertisement, of course. But we'll look at this line in the Four Knights English, where white plays pawn to g3 with the intention of fianchettoing. And a normal line for black would be bishop to b4, or d5, or maybe g6 himself. But this move, knight to d4, is unusual, and I'd never seen it before. The idea of this move, which has been played at the Super GM level, mostly by Korchnoi, is that black wants to exchange the knights. The knight on f3 for the knight on d4, and this will allow black to play c6 and d5 pretty quickly. In fact, most games go bishop to g2, knight takes knight, bishop takes, bishop to b4, with the idea of playing c6 and maybe d5. So this is a fairly typical looking English line. But in this position, you might ask yourself, why doesn't white just capture on e5 the pawn that black is hanging? And the author McDonald, well, first of all, he doesn't give knight takes as his game. He is one game in this line, and white plays this knight to h4, which is a little crazy looking. But he spends one sentence talking about knight takes e5. He says it is dangerous for white to take on e5 because queen e7, f4, d6, knight to d3, bishop f5, and black has a strong initiative for the pawn. And that's all he says. Well, I wanted more than that because I think this is a very interesting line. So I did some research myself into this line, and I'm going to share with you my, the fruits of my research. But first, let's go back to knight takes pawn. I mean, there are other moves, but we'll just talk about knight takes pawn here. And now queen e7 is the idea behind black's gambit. If the white knight moves, then knight to f3 is checkmate. So e3 is also no good because the e-pawn is pinned. So instead, f4 is forced. And now, pawn to d6. And basically white has the same options as before. He has this counterattack on the knight on d4, but it loses a piece. All you have to do is count. Pawn takes knight, pawn takes knight, pawn takes pawn, discovered check, also attacking the knight on c3. And if the knight blocks on e2, then d3 wins a piece on e2 because of the pin. So e3 is not in the position. So knight to d3 is forced. And now bishop to f5 attacks the knight on d3. It's not defended because this pawn isn't going anywhere. So there are three ways to meet the threat of bishop takes d3. And I've looked at all three of them, and my opinion is that only one of them is playable. There's pawn to e3, and there's also knight to b4, just running away, or king to f2, unpinning the e-pawn. Pawn to e3, there's a lot of old games finish with bishop to g4, and then the queen moves to a4, the only square, and then the bishop blocks the check. And now, in order to watch the knight c2 fork, the white queen has to go to d1. And then bishop to c6, and there's no good way to guard the rook on h1, because rook g1 and then knight f3 check. So Yeah, a lot of several short games ended like this. But bishop to g4 is not a good move because bishop to e2 is fine for white. Instead of bishop to g4, I suggest bishop to e4. And this appears to me like it wins material by force. Again, if rook g1, then knight f3, the fork, wins the rook on g1. So knight takes bishop is a must. And now queen takes, also threatening the rook on h1. So knight f2 defends the rook and attacks the queen. Now black has this check, knight c2 check, forces king e2, and now queen to g6. Now the black queen is out of danger, and the white rook on a1 is attacked. So in order to avoid knight takes rook, the rook needs to move, and now knight to d4 check. Pawn takes, queen takes rook, and black goes up the exchange. So that is the refutation of e3. Not bishop g4, but bishop to e4. Now let's look at knight b4, just running away. This move was played in a game between M-Chess, a very strong computer program, and Grandmaster Larry Christensen. And Christensen played the move that I liked. When I first saw this position, I said, oh, black can play c6, stopping those white knights from jumping into d5, and also preparing to win the knight on b4 by playing something like pawn to d5 or pawn to a5. In fact, there is this pretty line that goes bishop to g2, d5, a3, a5, queen a4, pinning the a-pawn, rook d8, unpinning the a-pawn, queen takes, and then knight b3, the fork. So, but as it turns out, white can play pawn to d3, and he's actually better here. But instead of c6, there's a move which pretty much wins by force. But the line is long and kind of hard to see. In fact, the computer and the Grandmaster both missed it in the same game. So that's how hard it is to come up with this over the board. The move is pawn to d5, putting a pawn on a square where 3 white pieces can take it. Now the real threat is queen takes b4. So, for example, say knight takes, and now knight takes. And now if pawn takes, then there is bishop to c2, which looks like a checkmate pattern, only instead of the king, it's the white queen that's being checkmated. So knight takes, and now queen to e4 hitting the rook on h1. And if white goes ahead and tries to win the rook on a8, then the knight will not be able to get out of there. So pretty much white will go down a piece. So rook to g1, and now knight f3 check, because the pawn is pinned, king f2, knight takes rook, knight takes, king d8, knight takes rook, and now queen h1 is winning for black. And this must have been beyond the computer's horizon, because all that was pretty much forced, and in this position the squares around white's king are falling. There's too many black pieces in the area. So knight b4 loses to the incredible pawn to d5. So the only move left is king to f2, unpinning the pawn. And I think that black should keep pieces on the board and try to gain space on the white king side. It's very, very hard for white to mobilize his center here, and black should take advantage of that. There's this miniature game, Robeson versus Barry, where black tried takes, and then queenside castle, but that was met by bishop to h3 check. And then knight to d7, because if the king just moves over, then there's rook to e1. So knight to d7, and now knight to d5. And then black resigned here, because the only safe square is queen e8, and now white has rook e1. And the blocking with the knight just loses a piece to f5. So don't take on d3. Instead, there's this game Stefan versus Harold, which is much better for black. In this game, black just castled right away, and after knight e1, king b8, which is an important waiting move because queen a4 is not going to attack the a7 pawn. So bishop g2, and then black plays h5, controlling some space, and then pawn to e3, bishop g4, attacking the queen, so the queen ran out here. Now the bishop came back to chase the queen, and then the queen fell back to a3. And now knight to f5. Queen b3 now is possible threatening mate, but knight g4 check, king f1, and c6. And this turned out to be good for black, who went on to win the game. Well, we're running out of time. Thank you for watching this video.